Palworld is officially launched into 1.0, leaving the limbo of early access and declaring itself a full finished game. This makes my job much easier. Job. Like I'm getting paid for this. Anyway, leaving early access means that it can be viewed more as a completed experience. Nothing in particular stops me from going over an early access title with a critical eye. In fact, there are a few that I have my sights on for potential future videos. But the unstable nature of an early access title makes it a little more difficult to objectively critique. An aspect of the game that I praise could be removed the next day in a development update, and the same could be true for something that feels less polished. The final release of a title could also be so dramatically different from the version that I talk about that they could basically be considered different games at that point. If they release at all, that is. But, digressions aside, let's talk about some of our pals. Palworld is an open-world survival crafting game where you wake up on a beach of an unknown land and are immediately greeted by a menagerie of sometimes friendly, sometimes hostile creatures that you can tame, raise, and send into battle. Wait, wrong game. Palworld is an open-world survival crafting game where you wake up on a beach of an unknown land and are immediately greeted by a menagerie of sometimes friendly, sometimes hostile creatures that you can tame, raise, and send into battle. It's equal parts adventure, base builder, and creature collector. To be honest, it doesn't tread a lot of new ground as far as survival crafting games go. I think most of the things it does have been done in other similar games. But despite not reinventing the wheel, the charm it brings to the genre feels relatively fresh. I made a joke about it being Ark Survival Evolved, but other than the visuals, the two games are very similar in a lot of ways. You wake up, build your shack out of sticks and dirt, subjugate the local fauna, and grind your way up a tech tree until you're shooting laser beams from the back of a dragon. Although I suppose you could reduce many survival crafting games into that pattern. If it were Conan Exiles instead of cute creatures and laser beams, you'd have kidnappings and big floppy dongs. Anyway. However, before we get into the meat of it, we have to address the mammoris in the room as it pertains to some of the things that may have changed or been removed between early access and the full release. That is, of course, the lawsuit between Pocket Pair, the developers of Palworld, and Nintendo. If you are unaware, Nintendo filed a patent infringement lawsuit against Pocket Pair in late 2024 for what originally began as just the similarity between Palworld and some obscure creature collecting game from the 90s, in that both games utilized throwing spheres to capture virtual characters. However, as time went on, the waters of this lawsuit began to get muddied as Nintendo would amend some of its existing patents or attempt to file new ones just before issuing further patent infringement lawsuits. Some of these patents included frameworks for things as general as mounting. Sorry to say this, but if you've ever ridden a horse, Nintendo is probably sending the Pinkertons to your house right now. There's a whole tangle of things that can be talked about with this situation that, at the time of recording this, is still ongoing. But all of that is the subject of a different discussion. For now, just know that as a protective measure against some of these legal claims, Pocket Pair adjusted some mechanics in-game before the 1.0 release. Some of these changes included throwing out the sphere that contained your pal when summoning it, and the ability to have certain pals take the place of your glider as you hold onto them to glide. Obviously, some of these changes are bummers, but I cannot hold it against Palworld as they were done to protect the game as a whole. To be honest with you, I like this game a lot. Survival crafting games are my niche, and you mix base building and decorating with creature collection on top of that, you've almost guaranteed a couple hundred hours out of me. There are many things I could list in my likes and criticisms section of this video, but for the sake of brevity, we'll limit it to just some key highlights. Oh, and of course, all of this is just my opinions. You do not need to agree with them. With that said though, let's get into some of the things I like about the game. Creature variety. Obviously, the biggest appeal of Palworld is going to be the pals. It's not going to be the crafting. Then they'd have to name it something silly like Craftopia. Okay. The creatures in this game follow the standard elemental cycle you see in many games. So you got pals that are themed around fire, grass, ground, electric, or water that each have a type advantage against the next element in the cycle. Then you have other offshoot elements such as ice, dragon, dark, and neutral. As far as favorites go, I think I typically tend to lean more towards the dark pals, as I feel that they have a lot more fun in their designs. Speaking of, the designs of a lot of the pals are fantastic. You can also really tell how much more they were willing to experiment creatively with some of the designs of the later introduced pals versus the early ones. Like the OG pals consist of cat, chicken, cow, sheep. Meanwhile, in the later pals, we get things like a little eldritch creature living inside of a fish costume that dual wields water pistols, and motherfucking Nico one-shot. Some of them may be a little similar to creatures from other games, but we'll talk about that in a minute. There's pals for days. Some are cute, some are cool. There's pals that look like wandering Ronin. There's pals that are freaky little owl creatures. There's a goddamn monkey with a machine gun. Hell, they heard some of you guys really wanted to f that one lizard. So they went ahead and made a lizard that wanders the roads at night looking for things to and has a chance on defeat to drop a memory wiping potion. Best not to read into that one. I think one of my favorite pals by far, despite not being a dark type, is actually one of the newer pals called Scutless. Because apart from being generally all around useful to have in your base if you're growing crops, it has a pretty unique ability. It swims up to you and essentially decapitates itself and allows you to quite literally unsheath its severed head and spine from its body and wield it as a blade. That is one of the sickest f***ing things a video game has ever allowed me to do. I love that fish. Which leads me to the next thing this game has going for it.
Partner abilities and synergies.
Every pal comes with what is called a partner ability. This ability gives them special attacks, unique uses when stationed at a base, special movement abilities when ridden, or bonuses to the player or other pals while having them in your party. Using these, you can build craft your party to a certain extent and base your team comp around how you want to play the game. You can buff pals of a specific type and have a main pal that does a ton of damage, or have your party based around always having a type advantage. Another possible team comp that I heard is becoming pretty popular was using all pals that buff the player and turning yourself into a damage-dealing incarnate of destruction. For a while, a fun build I was trying to do was have a squad of pals that hover around me at all times and act like little turrets that fight alongside me, even if I don't have them summoned. On top of having partner abilities unique to a specific breed of pal, each pal also has a set of up to 4 passive skills. These skills operate as traits or natures that give the pal either buffs or debuffs. There are passives that give pals increased damage output, but at a trade-off of reduced work speed and vice versa. Some are very common and some are super rare. You can catch several pals of the same breed, and they can have wildly different passive skills. These passives can also be passed down from parent pals to their offspring via breeding if you're looking to min-max, but that's something you won't need to be worried about until later in the game, and we will get there. Point being is that these systems add a lot of flexibility in which pals you may choose to run with for a specific job.
Exploration.
It's pretty common for exploration to play a major role in a survival crafting game. The way Palworld handles it doesn't stray too far from the typical formula, but has just enough of its own flavor added in to feel pretty satisfying. The zones in Palworld have some pretty interesting topography that you are allowed to explore every inch of thanks to the ability to climb just about any surface a la Conan Exiles, so long as you don't run out of stamina doing so. As you explore, you reveal small areas of the map until you reach towers that reveal bigger chunks of the map. In these different areas, you'll run into different pals of varying types. As you might expect, if you go to the frigid mountaintop, you'll probably run into ice-type pals. All of this is pretty common in a lot of games of this type, but Palworld rewards the player exploration in a couple ways. Apart from being given some experience when discovering a new location, the player with a keen eye will also occasionally stumble upon special glowing effigies in the shape of pals that can be collected. Each area has its own kind of effigy to be discovered, except for the Leaf Monk effigy, which can be found in almost all regions. These effigies can be taken to a special structure and converted directly into upgrades for the player's stats, increasing things like their capture power, resistances, movement speed, and so on. Effigies can be spotted pretty easily at night particularly, thanks to the glow that they give off. So by the time the player has harnessed the gift of flight, nighttime becomes prime effigy hunting time. You'll also encounter some other goodies scattered around on your adventure, like chests that can have some cool loot in it like schematics that can teach you a weapon or armor of a higher quality than you get from a tech tree, and dungeons that you can run through to get some other good rewards out of. Even just navigating the map itself can sometimes be a pretty satisfying experience. Having a bunch of different pals that can be used as mounts means having a bunch of different methods of transportation. Galloping, bouncing, swimming, flying. However, in my opinion, all of these travel pals pale in comparison to one that doesn't even have feet, wings, fins, or any other typical mobility appendage, and that is the humble Hangyu. They can be found at a pretty early level, and once you've crafted a harness for it, it becomes the key component to a very fun movement tech. Hangyu's partner ability is that it adds a slight upward momentum to your glider. This sounds pretty underwhelming alone, but once you pair it with a grappling gun, you've officially unlocked a high-speed express flight that can take you across the damn ocean. That is, of course, unless you smack yourself straight into a barren mountainside. And with that, let's get into some of my criticisms of the game.
Zone inconsistency.
As mentioned earlier, the world of the Pals has some pretty interesting zones to explore. The game takes place in an area called the Palpagos Islands. which is an archipelago of islands containing different biomes. This is a pretty easy game design technique to clearly separate your zones. Here's your ice zone, your volcano zone, your desert zone, etc, etc. All of that is totally fine, but the problem with it is that it often leads to some areas receiving more attention than others, and Palworld is no exception. It has some areas that have some incredibly interesting designs and details, like rocky crags that tower overhead or hidden waterfalls in a bamboo grove, but it also has some regions that did not receive that same level of detail. While I understand that some areas like deserts have a reputation for being vast, empty, hostile areas, that doesn't mean that the in-game desert should also be huge with not a lot going on in it. The desert zone feels like it wants to have a little bit of everything deserty, but doesn't want to commit to any of it. Big dunes, oasis, rocky plateaus, even a small desert town. It tries to incorporate all of these things, but none of them feel super fleshed out, leading to an entire island that has some points of interest but feels mostly empty.
Speaking of mostly empty,
if you visited some of the mountains in Palworld, you may have noticed that some of them have sides to them that feel like they had intention and thought put into how you traverse them, while other sides seem pretty barren. I'm talking just raised ground textures with nothing on them barren. You can make the argument that that isn't the intended side for the player to approach the mountain because a clear path of progression was created for them on a different side, and that is a fair argument, but the point is that I can be on this side, and in a game where the player is expected to explore, and given the ability to go basically anywhere they want, there should be a little more attention put into these regions than just mostly empty ground textures or sheer cliffs, even if they are not the intended path of progression. Another little nitpick that I have about the map is that occasionally you'll find some areas that have some ruins or unique structures to them that kind of make you interested in what these areas are and what you might find there, but don't really seem like there is actually anything going on with them other than they looked neat. I think the game would have benefited more from having things in these areas like more towns to breathe some life into them and give players more options than just the 2 or 3 small settlements that there already are, or by placing the arena in them to give it more of a grand setting than the small remote island that it's on. Oh, and a lot of the cave dungeons you can find scattered around kind of follow the same copy-paste procedural layout. So if you've done one, you've done mostly all of them. But hey, at least that means you can full sprint to the end and knock out the bosses for quick rewards and experience.
derivative designs.
Palworld is a game that pretty clearly wears a lot of its inspirations on its sleeve. Obviously, comparisons can be drawn to another very popular video game series owned by Nintendo, The Legend of Zelda. Jokes aside, I actually really hate when people jump to Nintendo's defense straight away. Oh, the game uses a glider, so they're copying Breath of the Wild. First off, the multi-billion-dollar corporation is not your friend. You do not need to white knight for them. With many of their practices, Nintendo might actually f***ing hate you and all other developers not owned by them. That said, it is true that while gliding is not unique to Breath of the Wild, the design of the gliders in Palworld are very reminiscent to those from Breath of the Wild. However, towers that reveal part of the map are not similar to Sheikah towers, because that shit is from Assassin's Creed. Now, there's nothing wrong with taking inspiration from other media, but let's be fair, some of the inspirations seen in Palworld can be a little heavy-handed. There may be some possibility that some of the PAL designs are a little derivative of designs from another popular creature franchise. It's Pokemon. There, I said it, some of them borrow pretty heavy from Pokemon. But not every PAL that has a Pokemon parallel is necessarily a derivation of that Pokemon. Some are just cultural or mythological references that share similar ideas. When you have an association with foxes and fire, you're gonna get fire foxes. Similarly, when you have legends of water dragons with jewels, you're gonna get a water dragon with jewels. But sometimes it's a little too similar. Most of these designs, however, did get changed for the full release of the game, and I think that was a good move, as the newer designs give the PALs a little bit more uniqueness. Like, look at the updated face for Grintail. It's so mischievous, I love him. Meanwhile, the old version looked like a cat bus with a Meowth face slapped on it. Although it's pretty transparent with a lot of its inspirations, Palworld is actually cleverly deceptive, because it starts off by making you think you're going on a grand survival crafting adventure with Pokemon from Temu wielding guns, but after a certain point, you slowly realize what you've actually been playing is satisfactory.
Late game.
Now this one is more of a double-edged sword. Late game in Palworld is where the game starts to reward you with really cool things, but also can get really tedious. By the time you made it to level 50 or so, you may have noticed the difficulty curve begin to outpace you if you haven't kept up with top-of-the-line weapons and armor. In the process of getting said equipment upgrades, If you're like me, you will likely experience a phenomenon I like to refer to as Hal's light bulb. I have dated myself with that reference. What that means is that while you may have a singular achievable objective, in the process of completing it, you will run into a series of cascading sub-objectives, turning a seemingly simple task into a much more complex one. You're going to need a new metal type that you've never heard of that requires you to upgrade all your production lines, that's going to make you redo all your power infrastructure and reassign all your pals to a new specific job, only to find out that by the time you finish prepping to mass produce said metal, you have leveled up enough to actually need to start mass producing a different metal type. And in order to begin producing that metal, you're going to need to do some raids. Now, full transparency, since the launch of 1.0, I have not yet experienced the update to raids, mainly because I was waiting to unlock an additional base slot so I can build a summoning altar there alone. But I have seen that one that doesn't use the altar, and that one looks cool. But if the summoning altar raids are anything like they were in early access, don't get lulled into a false sense of security after doing the early ones, because you're going to be experiencing a huge difficulty spike, so be ready. You're going to need them if you want a steady flow of a particular crafting resource. Palworld originally launched in early access in early 2024 with a price tag of $29.99 USD, and has kept that price with its official full release. That's pretty cool considering that it hasn't been super uncommon for games to increase their price after leaving early access. I remember there being a pretty big uproar about the release of Ark Survival Evolved, as it raised its price from $29.99 to $59.99 after leaving early access. But that game also already had a history of some pretty greedy business strategies. Retaining its $30 price tag means that you're getting a pretty good amount of bang for your buck. I bought the game in early access for that much, and at the time of recording this, I have given it over 260 hours of my life, and intend to keep playing it more. Needless to say, I think I've gotten my money's worth. So, would I recommend Palworld? If you are a fan of creature collecting, and want to build a farm for you and all your cute new friends to live on, 100%. Or, if you'd rather be armed to the teeth and take on giant monsters, also yes. I think Palworld is the best Pokemon-style game that we have gotten outside of Pokemon. Speaking of, apparently Palworld has sold as many copies as, if not more than, most mainline entries into the Pokemon series. That's not to say I'm not a Pokemon fan. I played every mainline Pokemon game up to X and Y. It just means that, hopefully, with some of this success, we might see some creative things come out of Pocket Pair in the future. Or maybe we'll see them invest some of that success into other projects they may have. Anyway, that's just some of my thoughts. If you made it this far, tell me what you think below. Would you recommend this game? Where do you think the game could be improved on? Or just, who's your favorite pal? Oh, and thanks for watching.